this insight of there being no self, which you've had before, I know, and to various degrees, but this
I feel like
absolute
that's what,
end to it.
yeah, I feel like Asilomar was a good part of that wiped out, but this was different. It was really hard. Yeah. Which is paradoxical to have such a personal sense of it. It doesn't make any sense at all, but it's there. It's what's real. So I can't deny it.
Well, when you say it was hard, what made it hard? Or maybe even what was surprising about it?
I think what was the most surprising about it is that orientation, not having something to rely on. It reminds me of when Adyashanti says there's nowhere left to rest your head. And I felt that a few times, but this is really like there's no way to orient to life anymore. And I think that's sort of shocking, at least you could say to the system, right? Even.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, where it's like the framework of how I would orient to life, even if it was there subtly before, it was still a framework of how to orient to life, moment to moment, even if it's more presence or through teaching or whatever it is, it's still a way to orient to life that there's something relying on. Like it's like literally like feels like latita or something, like you're leaning on something. And that's creating a sense of dualistic expression to some extent still when there's some orientation to life. And what feels like happened was the obliteration of that. I don't know if that's the right word, obliteration.
Obliteration,
Obliteration. Obliteration.
Yeah.
The obliteration of that structure where it was okay in retreat because we're in retreat, so it was just orienting to meditation, really. There wasn't much to necessarily orient to, though I don't know how detailed you want me to go into that experience.
No, I just wanted to like kind of highlight that. I remember you one night definitely crying a lot, like more than I had ever seen you cry actually. And at the same time,
it was like
staring out into the rain, just like loving the rain too. I remember that very clearly as well.
It was like being like radically stripped away from something that even subtly something was so glued to and attached to. Or not even attached, but more like grasped onto. It's like almost like two particles that are so intertwined together. They were believed, like there was a belief that was like, oh, well, this is one, but like this isn't one. There's two things that are glued together still. And they sort of needed to be radically stripped away from each other, which was painful physically and mentally and emotionally in so many ways. It was just painful because I could just feel that visceral, like, oh my God, I'm being completely like obliterated, like I'm dying completely. I don't know how to explain it.
I think that's a good explanation.
And it was like the end of the end, like the beginning of the end had already started, but it was like the end of the end kind of thing where it was like, oh my God. And it was so nuanced and specific. And it was just seeing in that, like the flash of the whole life, and not even just Violet's life, but all of life in the way that we orient to life, the way that we move through these coping mechanisms of what we think is better or worse, or what we think is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, or what gives us security or what gives us love, or and I think to some extent this stuff is talked about, and you lose the sense of this in First Awakening and surely in other stages, but it's like in this sort of finality of it all, it's really like there's nothing to orient to. There's nothing to hide in and create a self in and create any distance. It's not even creating a self, but because a lot of this last year didn't feel like it was creating a self. It was just like some like background structure or something that was sort of holding mechanisms together or behavior patterns together. And that whole thing just like crumbled. So in that I could see just the tragedy of how the self, the whole mechanism of self is a grasp, is a hold on to this, a hold on to this, hold on to this. And it's like, just open your hand and let the sand slip through your fingers and everything's okay. And it was beautiful because I went to bed crying and feeling this tragedy and this like, oh my God, like horror of like, I just died right now. And it wasn't even that I died. It was like a structure of, it wasn't.
Like everything dies.
Yeah, it was everything dies.
The whole world dies. Everything you ever thought, your hopes, dreams, any place you feel like you can go back to settle yourself, to regroup, like it's just gone. You realize it was all an illusion, including the spiritual journey.
Yeah, exactly.
And that can be hard to let go.
That was the hardest thing, was that like, oh my God, I was like, oh my God, my whole 5 years of like, this was the most important 5 years of my life. I still sort of had some bit of narrative there, right? Like this whole 5 years of my life, and it is the most important, these 5 years was the most important part of my life for that storyline, right? But nothing beyond that. And when there's a grasping of that storyline, even though you see that it's not anyone's story, there's still a grasping of that in and of itself. It was like everything was not the way that that I thought it was. And it reminded me of like, there was a story of a girl at Adi Ashanti's retreat, or a woman at Adi Ashanti's retreat that was like, she told everybody on the microphone to leave. Like, so it was.
When she ran up on the stage, grabbed the mic, and said, "Everyone, leave! You don't want to go where he's pointing you."
Yeah, and that's what I was like. Oh, like I it's like it's funny because I think I understand this a little bit more and more, and I did over the years. But until it happens fully, do I really understand it? Like this is not what I came for, and in some ways I did come for this. But it was just it's just really radical and hard to talk about. And then I don't know if you find it useful or not, but I was going to share a little bit about getting back home and.
So I just want to say a little bit about this because Adi Ashanti is one of the very few people I hear talk about this very directly. Yeah. And even he said when he first started talking about it, he stopped for many years because people found it so distressing.
Scary. Yeah.
It's so scary, and it should be, and it kind of has to be. And he's also said it's not wantable. Yeah. And it's not wantable, but I want to point out that it is natural. It's completely natural. And for the person that thought they were to go through this, when death is pointing you right in the face, there's no way to that not to be terrifying. Yeah. I mean, absolute death. So,
of everything, the whole universe, the whole world.
Yeah. I mean, even the perception that there could be a world, all of it.
But it's not that something died. It's to see that all of that was one thought.
That's what I'm pointing at. All of it was one thought.
And that's what's fucking totally bozo natural about it.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, and so when you were like, I could feel, I felt you suffer in various ways, but I've never felt that kind of despair from you. And laying next to you, I wasn't trying to fix it. I was just feeling it with you. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. But at the same time, I was kind of pointing out to you like, and yet it's just one thought bubble popping right now. Like, it's crazy that and this is just naturalness, but this naturalness has no underlying truth, reality, way of being. It's crazy. It's the paradox gets so paradoxical that it kind of swallows itself. Yes. And you walk out, something walks out of the other side of it. And I don't know what it is, but it's a very real death.
Yeah, I heard Frank Yang say something recently of like in that stage, like the snake consumes its tail. Like it can't reach its tail the whole rest of the time, or it takes a chunk out of it, but it like something like that. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
It just blips out.
Yeah.
And then not you, but whatever this is somehow sees things accurately, but that doesn't mean there's a special way of seeing. It doesn't mean that there's a structure to reality.